Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be talking about John Lowe II, who was a pastor in Warsaw, Indiana, who just confessed, and this went viral, by the way.
And I have an announcement for you. It's called a confession. I committed adultery. It was nearly 20 years ago. It continued far too long. It involved one person, and there's been no other, nor any other situations of unbecoming conduct for the last 20 years.
He just confessed to an adulterous affair that he had years ago, 20-some years ago. And it's gone viral because the person with whom he had the affair came up immediately after and basically said, "I was 16 when you did that to me."
For 27 years, I lived in a prison. It was not 20 years. I lived in a prison of lies and shame. Lying to protect the Lowe family. For years, I thought I was a horrible person having suicidal thoughts, not realizing what had been truly done to me. That I was a victim, and I would still be in a prison if my brother, and many of you know him, Edgar Wolf, had not approached me just 2 weeks ago with what he had seen as a teenager that bothered him all these years. His pastor in bed with his younger sister, a t-shirt and underwear on. People knew but were too afraid to come forward, and they have now. The lies and the manipulation have to stop. I was a prisoner and you kept me in your prison. I'm a prisoner no longer. I was just 16 when you took my virginity on your office floor. Do you remember that? I know you do, and I have plenty of other stories that I could bring to your remembrance. You did things to my teenage body that had never and should have never been done. If you can't admit the truth, you have to answer to God. You are not the victim here. I tried to tell someone, but all that was done was cover up. No one ever came to me. No one ever helped me. No one ever got me counseling. I have wanted to talk to somebody all of these years and never. You have. You have somebody that you've talked to. I never have. The church deserves to know the truth. This church has been built on lies, but no more. The lies need to stop. I could give story after story after story to what you did to me. Michael, your dad is not the victim here. A partial truth is not true. If I would have gotten counseling, your dad would be in prison. It might not be the way, but every time you covered up for Russ Spangle. My best friend was my age when your associate pastor was molesting his 2 daughters. And you know that. You sent him to be a pastor at another church. We can call Melanie right now, and Cassie, her sister. They sat down with you. You sent Melanie away.
So this is just going hog wild on the internet. And I want to talk about it simply because I'm troubled with a lot of things that are going on in this whole scenario. I'm troubled because what I'm seeing from this church and what I'm seeing from the pastor and from everybody involved, it's so typical. It happens over and over and over again. There are patterns that I think we need to learn from. And I think especially as Christians in the Christian community, we need to learn from this. This is not something that's just for Christians. This is something that happens across the board. And I want to talk about it because the dynamics here are real and they are universal. First of all, I want to talk about the pastor. For 30-some years, he's been covering up this particular affair that he's had. I thought it was 20 plus years. It's 20 or 30 years. He's been covering up, not saying anything. I'm pretty sure his family knows nothing about it for that period of time. But something happens. I know in this video we learned that the brother of the particular person who was molested by him for 3-4 years, her brother basically says, "I can't take this anymore. It's going to get exposed." And so I'm guessing for several reasons throughout this video. You'll see why, but for several reasons, I'm guessing the pastor knew it was coming and he had to come clean. So he's doing damage control. The congregation seems to know this is coming, his confession and what he's going to say. Why? Because as he's being introduced, people are giving him so much support because they know they need to give him support. He needs support in this hour of struggle for him.
In case you don't know, I'm Pastor John Lowe, and
All right. But also, whoever's filming this knew what was about to take place. Why? He starts his video right at the end of a prayer. And the prayer is a prayer for salvation. And this is one of the first things that troubles me. He's about ready to confess to the church that he has sinned. All right? He has sinned. He's had an affair. But before he does, he gives an altar call. And after the service, if you want to, you can come forward for prayer. Doesn't he know he's about ready to give the biggest bombshell of his life upon people? And some visitor coming, oh gosh, I just love, I just need to serve the Lord because I'm a sinner and I need to find help in this church. The motto in this church basically says, God is good. His word is true and it works in your life. So it's going to work in my life. It's going to change me so I can put away my sins. And then the very person who led you to Christ comes out and says, I had an affair for 4 years, 3 or 4 years ago. What a great way to start your faith. Okay, so there's something wrong with this whole picture. And, I can't figure out, I can't put my hand quite on what's bothering me about this, but I know it's just downright wrong. It's almost like, let's get this part over with, then we'll get the next part over with. There's certain amount of detachment from what's going on here, from the reality of the whole situation. The final thing that I'm going to mention before I get into this, the congregation shows so much love and support for him. This is so typical.
I ask you to forgive me, and that's all I can do. We love you so much, God. God, I pray for this body that has been wounded, that you begin to heal us, Lord. That you begin to bring us back together as a unit, Lord. God, all sin has consequences, but you are faithful and just in all that you do.
If you did it, you need to admit it. That's right. 100%.
Did it? You need to admit it.
The pastor is doing damage control. He is controlling the narrative. He's been practicing this. He's already told his family. I'm going to present to you what I think happened. I think happened maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. He got wind that an expose was coming. He knows he can't hide anymore, so he's going to confess it all. But he's got to control that narrative. What is said, what isn't said, how it's said. In certain ways, he's going to pat himself on the back. I'm not going to stoop to using the Bible.
I committed adultery. It was nearly 20 years ago. It continued far too long. It involved one person, and there's been no other, nor any other situations of unbecoming conduct for the last 20 years. I will not use the Bible to defend, protect, to deflect my past sin.
Now it's a strange thing. I'm not sure where he's going with that, because later on he will say he's doing the biblical thing by confessing and seeking reconciliation. So I'm not sure where he's going with that, what's bothering him. I'm guessing he's seen preachers using the Bible to get themselves out of something. I'm not sure. Whatever it is, he is above it. So he's doing damage control. He makes himself appear the perfect disciple of Christ, not in following Christ in the good things, but rather when we sin, we need to go through certain steps. And this seems a little bit too controlled, a little bit heartless, if you would. Now I know some of you will say you're judging. No, what I'm trying to do is break this down, because you're going to see this over and over and over again in different ways in different places. And I'd like you to act and react in a better way than what I'm seeing happening here in this congregation. And I just don't want to blame the congregation, because they are acting as so many other groups typically act in similar situation, Christian or not. So damage control. He makes a point of making himself look noble in dealing with sin. He puts down the straw man who uses the Bible to sway people. He is in control of the narrative, faithful to the Word of God in how he, step by step, works through his sin. He puts down the confessions that hide behind the Bible. He's already okay with his family and his wife. I don't know anything about his family and his wife, so I really can't say anything here. But he makes it come across as it's okay, because I did this step by step as I'm supposed to do. It's going to be okay. It's all okay. He makes it sound like that. I'm sure at his house things are not okay, but I won't get into that simply because that's all conjecture, and it doesn't really matter at this point. But I'm going to move on. And where am I here? Why didn't the girl... I'm going to go through some questions that are typical for what a lot of people ask. Why didn't the girl say something first of all, during the 4 years that she was in the affair, and then for the 20-some years, 20, 30 years after what has gone on? And there are so many reasons, and they're so deep and so complicated. So I'm just going to give you some examples and give you just a few touch points to help you understand why people don't come out that you would expect to come out and say something. And the very first thing is a guy in the Southern Baptist Convention. 40 years ago, he was being molested by his youth pastor as he was a 12-year-old kid. And that went on for, 3 years. And he says now that it's coming out in the open in the Southern Baptist Convention that they've been having cover-up after cover-up after cover-up going on for years. He said, we got brushed aside. He's talking about himself, and he's talking about those people who were sexually abused and who came forward, or who didn't come forward for the reasons mentioned, that he will say, we were brushed aside, and hateful things were said about us or to us. And that is probably the most moving words the best way to get down to the very core of what these people deal with. They are being brushed aside, but let's get into why. In order to understand why, and once again, this is just touching the surface of the issues. There's group dynamics. Groups take on a life of their own. They want to follow certain patterns, very similar patterns, but they want to thrive. They want to be alive. Boil it down to this girl, this woman, molested by her pastor, and who took her and had sex with her for year after year after year as a teenager. She threatens the cohesion of that entire group. Do you see where the group is going? Do you see where their love lies? It's not with this girl. It's with the pastor. At the end, you see the entire congregation, well, the majority of the congregation, gathering around the pastor to pray for him. Poor pastor, you sinned and were exposed. Very few will gather around the woman who really needs it the most. She's lived with years that have affected her in a negative way. Whistleblowers face negative consequences in businesses. Why? Almost always. All your businesses will come out and say, we will give you no... they're going to protect their whistleblowers. They promise you that. But how many businesses follow through with that? And maybe the business, people on top will protect you, keep your job, but the people you work with, they will turn on you. They'll find ways to get even. Whistleblowers are rarely congratulated, and it's usually at the end of a deep and hard struggle. Groups have stories they tell about themselves, and they like their stories. We are moral. We are united. We are Christian. We are elite. We're special because we have special gifts. We know more of the Bible than anybody else. There's always something elite that seems to attach itself to different groups. And leaders in groups are very important, especially successful ones. If you see a church growing, it's a sign that God is doing a work. They lead, they guard, they protect. There's a certain image and a certain authority and power that is given to a pastor or to a leader. Groups often and usually turn against whistleblowers, tattletales, victims who expose. And they create a stigma. And they create a shame for those who do that. And they ostracize. So it's tough to be that person who's been abused by a leader. Now, here's some other things I just want to bring up that also kind of come in. There's so many different angles and so many different things to say about this. And I could only touch the surface. There's cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? That's when you have two conflicting ideas coming at you at once. I dealt with this in faith healing, okay? And I don't want to get into that right now, but let's say I have the idea that the pastor is good. I love the pastor. He's special, and he's meant a lot to me. He's helped me out a lot. Some of his sermons are spot on, and just I've gained so much from him. And sometimes I feel God when I hear that pastor talking. But now here's somebody saying that he abused them. Do you see the dissonance? It just doesn't connect. The pastor's been preaching holiness, follow God, be pure, stay away from sexual temptation. And yet he's giving into it. Do you see the dissonance? That's cognitive dissonance. And we need to find a way to bring everything together. And how do we bring it together? All too often, we blame the victim. Oh, she was asking for it. Oh, she just wants attention. Oh, she just wants money. All those different excuses are just ways, because, we're dealing with guys likewise who get abused from grown-ups, children for years and years and years will come out and say, so-and-so has touched me. And what's their response? No, they didn't. You're just lying. And so this is the response they get. What do you think they're going to do? Do you think they just want to come out and keep on beating that dead horse? No, they just turn inward. They turn into themselves and realize there's nothing I can do. Time and time again, there are people who are high up, powerful people who've had accusations against them, and nobody listens until it gets overwhelming. So we need cognitive dissonance, we need cognitive consistency. And the way that we make things consistent is by blaming the victim. And by the way, the victim, generally speaking, is not that important to the group. So it's easier to blame them on that level as well. Plus, figure, come on, who do you love more? This woman who just doesn't seem to connect with the pastor for some reason? Or do you like that pastor who helps you week after week after week? Who's got you married, who took care of your kids by baptizing them when they got a little older or whatever. I don't know what your church does. All that kind of stuff. So you attach yourself to the leader far more than you'll ever attach yourself to the victim. Larry Nassar, for 18 years, he was the doctor, and a very powerful and very loved doctor in the Olympics, molesting one girl after another, doing terrible sexual things. And 20 years before he got exposed, people were starting to come out and say, he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing. But nobody listened. Why? Because he was loved and because he was important. Bill Cosby. When the first person, I think there were 3 all at once, that's the first time anybody listened, because they were coming out before then. But when 3 at once, 2 or 3 came out and said, Bill has been doing this to us, drugging us and having sex with us. The first thing I heard when I brought this up to somebody is, oh, they're just looking for the money. Do you see, this is where we go as groups. And it's not just this church. This young girl, 16-year-old, the pastor is a very powerful person to her. He's a leader, not just a leader, but, powerful person, dynamic personality. Adults look up to him. He is spiritually in authority. There are churches that actually teach you that if you don't submit to your pastor and don't listen to them, if you don't obey them, you're disobeying God. And yet he comes on to her as a 16-year-old sophomore in high school and has sex with her in the church's office floor. Well, what's she going to do? What's she going to say? I think she lived in fear for years. All right, her feelings were violated. And yet the church, it doesn't see that. They just see something else that's going on. And once again, I don't blame the church. This is human behavior. I've seen this and I've read about these types of things going on over and over again in high schools, in communities, in churches, in just everywhere. And I think it's time to really start thinking through, how am I going to act and react when somebody I love is being accused of having some kind of affair that was illegitimate and far beyond illegitimate, that was downright wrong?